Lucas, Tommy Lahren here. In talking with supporters about, I guess, their excitement for the president or the vice president, have you heard any of those supporters float any other names, like maybe a California governor, Gavin Newsom? Anybody making those murmurs or those suggestions amongst the couple hundred that President Biden was able to amass there?
Right, Tommy, I asked that question because they're trying to see if there's anybody else, and maybe they'd choose everybody here. This is a very pro-union. There's a union hall behind me. Joe Biden, of course, claimed to be the most pro-union president in history. All these people looked like it was pre-screened. They were here to talk about Joe Biden. One gentleman I spoke to said he had supported Kamala Harris in the primary, and if she was the nominee, he would support her. One thing I should note, President Biden spent about 20, 30 minutes on the rope line talking to supporters. Numerous times I yelled, try to get the president's attention, asking him about Nadler and Adam Smith, calling him to drop out of the race. The president appeared to hear me, but ignored my questions, guys.
Lucas, Joe Jones, I wanted to ask you about the Vegas odds here on who might replace Biden, but we're not at that point yet, and we might need to give that another day. At the Wisconsin rally, he had somebody behind him with signs that said, "Pass the torch, Joe." Was there any detractors whatsoever there today? I know you've said it looked pretty well screened, but did you see anyone, protesting or detracting in any way?
I did not, Joe. In fact, when I yelled those questions at President Biden, a number of people turned my way and, asked why I was yelling all that stuff. I said, you all get to eat here. The only way I get to eat is by asking questions. So they all seem firmly in the Biden camp.
All right.
Hey, Lucas, Nicole Sapphire. So quick question for you. There was a post-debate poll from CBS that said 72% of all registered voters had concerns about, whether President Biden would have the mental stamina to do another 4 years. These top Democratic lawmakers meeting today, are they really just voicing the concerns of the voters, their constituents, or do you think there's a bigger picture here?
There's no question, Doc. In fact, that was going to be my first question to President Biden until this news came in about Jerry Nadler and Adam Smith, that a vast majority of the country does not want Joe Biden to be in this race. And that was the question I was going to ask, and that's what I asked other people. But the people I spoke to here were firmly in the Biden camp. But it's certainly, when you hear about these Democratic lawmakers who represent these people that were in that poll, certainly they are sharing the same concerns of the people they represent. And when I mentioned the 5 House Democrats, perhaps more now we're up to 7 now, calling for the president to bow out of the race. When I mentioned that to some of the supporters here, they thought they were all just representing their local interests. But clearly, Doc, in fact, you could go back 2 years to a CNN poll 2 years ago, July of 2022, that said 75% of Democrats did not want Joe Biden to be the nominee. And here we are.
Great reporting, Lucas. Thank you very much. So, Tommy, obviously, we're hearing a lot from Democrats, especially with this call that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries had with House leaders. There's a lot of off-the-record, unnamed carping about him, but obviously he's got a real problem on the Dem flank for the president.
Yeah, he certainly does. And we talked about this earlier, but I think you're going to see a slow trickle of this leading to a waterfall later in the week. I really do. I talked about this all day yesterday. We talked about it this morning on Fox and Friends. After that debate, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You've got top Democrat leftist media pundits immediately after the debate saying it's time to pull the ripcord on Joe. And then now you've got top Democrats potentially leaking that they want Joe to step down. They're already saying maybe they have support for Vice President Kamala Harris. There's just no way to reverse this at this point. The man could do somersaults and cartwheels, and I don't think you're going to convince any Democrat that this is the way to go. And I know that we've been talking about if Joe decides, then that's what Joe will decide. But I just don't buy it. I think Democrats are cutthroat, and they will find a way. If it's a death by 1,000 cuts, that's what it will be. But I expect a waterfall by the end of the week.
I think if he did somersaults, I think that might actually change the topic.
It can't be a falling somersault, though.
Exactly. It can't be falling up the steps. Joey, when you put Democrats' names to it, it gets a little bit more. They get a little bit more careful about it. Watch this.
I think, it's important to be loyal, but part of being loyal is being honest. And I think we have to be honest to each other of just how difficult of a situation this is. I think you're going to see a significant amount of pressure, whether it's today or tomorrow, sometime this week as the members come back, that this may be untenable for them to all want to run under a Biden ticket.
Voters do have questions. And personally, I love Joe Biden. I don't know that the interview on Friday night did enough to answer those questions. And so I think this week is going to be absolutely critical. I think the president needs to do more.
President Biden can clearly defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in the history of this country. And the choice is quite clear.
Well, I mean, of course, Bernie Sanders doesn't think he's too old. I mean, that would be a little bit self-sabotage there, wouldn't it?
He's also getting everything he wants.
Listen.
He also has good memory recall, which is very different.
That's a great point. He is getting everything he wants. And that is, when they go back to the record, Joe Biden has been a great president for the progressives in the party and the far left. I don't see how they could be upset with him. And maybe that's why they had blinders on, or why they wanted to carry the water for him as much as they could. I think the big problem right now is logistically, how do you make it work? I would love to know where the DNC is on this. Do they have lawyers calling states to find out if they can change a name on the ballot, or are they pushing back to these Dems saying there's no way we can? I would like to know where the party leaders outside of office are on it, and I think that will probably be a big part of what happens here.
Yeah, they did hold a primary. Meantime, other Democrats are, quote, livid that Biden is digging in. Many are talking to the media, saying they have hit their breaking point with Biden. Axios reporting tonight, quote, Democrat lawmakers have gone from shock to sadness to madness since the debate 10 days ago. One Democrat told Axios, quote, the stuff is going to hit the fan on Monday when Congress returns. People are scared about their own races, but they're also worried about the country and about democracy, end quote. All right, I don't really think that they care nearly as much about democracy or the country as they do about their own party prospects. Is this breaking through, going beyond the world of politics for people?
So first of all, if you actually look, it seems like Democrats right now are just going through all the stages of grief. They are grieving the death of the idea that Joe Biden can survive a presidency and do another 4 years. And so denial, anger, I mean, they're going through the motions right now. And sure, I think that they do have some concerns about their own elections coming into the election cycle. But at the end of the day, they have to put up a strong front. It's hard for Joe Biden to come forth and say, you know what, I can't do this. I'm going to step aside and let it be Vice President Kamala Harris. Because the Americans didn't choose Kamala Harris. If you looked at the primary for the 2020 election, they did not choose her. So Americans might not be happy with the fact that they may be getting her. I think it's a very tough time. I think that Joe Biden will have to step aside. I do not believe he's going to be the nominee for the next election. But they have to be very careful with their messaging right now, because if they give this appearance of complete chaos, they're certainly not going to get the moderates, the independents, and the other votes that they need.
It is kind of extraordinary to think about. Kamala Harris came in to the Democrat primary in 2020 with all the advantages and literally had flamed out before she got a single delegate out of the process.
Nobody wants Vice President Kamala Harris. That's why I've been saying this for so long. They will find a way. Everybody has a price. I don't know how they will get her to step aside, but I imagine it'll be immediate support for her, the idea of her, followed by we need to have integrity to the voter. As you mentioned, she didn't win a primary, and so we're going to have some contest within our party, and then it'll be, oh, people still don't like Kamala, imagine that, and there will come
Well, let's be clear. They're okay with her being vice president. They do not want her being president at all. She checks some boxes when it comes to being vice president. They do not want her, and they will not have her be their presidential nominee.
Yeah, listen, President Trump's been pretty quiet on this. His best option is to run against Joe Biden, because Joe Biden is a failed candidate at this moment. If it's not Biden, I think the best hope for Republicans is that whatever process plays forward is messy and divisive. And I think that'll be still a winning strategy for President Trump. So I'm less worried about who he ends up running against and more worried about how they get there as far as how it affects the general election.
Yeah, well, whether they end up getting gut shot and wind up with Kamala Harris or Biden limps all the way through, it's probably you'd rather be Trump right now than Joe Biden or the Democrats right now.
Trump just needs to sit back and not say anything and not make any of his own headlines.
Yep.
And just watch them implode.
Exactly.
Yes.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.